right, everybody. Welcome back to the Goat Rodeo Podcast. I am your host, Garrett Smith, joined by regular co-host Simon Kuhn, and becoming more regular, and that's not a statement on his GI tract. This is a statement more on his recurring featuring as a guest host on the podcast. Brian MacCarthy, the head of Booz Allen Ventures and a senior leader in the defense technology realm. Welcome back, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
And right here at the top of the pod, I think what we want to talk about is a little bit of geopolitics. Before we started recording, we were on kind of a riff or a ramble about China and Chinese dominance versus American dominance in a potentially multipolar world. The two areas that came up in that conversation were AI writ large and space writ large. I think some about both of those topics, but probably not at great depth. I do think that, we're obviously in a period of competition with a rising great power, a rising superpower. But Brian, do you want to start us off here? I think you've got ideas on the space topic, and we've heard some ambitious statements coming out of Beijing on space and satellite launches and stuff. Do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I just think with respect to the funding and capital they are putting into it, particularly through development of this, what they're calling a 15,000 to 20,000 satellite constellation called 1,000 Sails. They're doing, they're at this point probably maximizing for a few thousand additional satellites being launched in 2025, which is up from, I think, Simon, you Googled this, but like 90-ish last year. And I'm concerned because I think like we have spent so much time talking about, hypothetically Taiwan and the plans around defending Taiwan and the AI chip race, et cetera, but the dominance in the next set of warfare that's going to be happening real soon. And if you look at what they're doing compared to what Starlink's trying to capture, I think we are massively underwriting to a near peer adversary or peer adversary that is going to dominate space and will dominate it for the next 30 to 40 years if we don't have more competition in there.
Brian, I've never heard anybody describe you as a China dove on this topic. So do you have a prescriptive kind of message here? Like, first, do you believe that China can do what it's saying? And then second, what does our country have to do? Like, what does industry have to do? What does our country have to do? And maybe, I mean, you're a Booz Allen guy. You're a significant player, and your company's a significant player in the defense industry here in the United States and in the West. Like, what does private industry need to do? What does Booz have to do?
It's funny because I got asked the question of, do I think it's good to have essentially one company dominate the entire commercial space race, under Elon? My concern is there is no difference between China's commercial capability to launch and the venture capital that they would put into with 2,100 state funds. They are basically matching us dollar for dollar or yuan for dollar in the commercial space race, except they have multiple launch, hundreds and thousands of satellite companies, and all of it they can just take directly into the PLA. And so I think what I would say and be an advocate for is, like many other things, is how do we deregulate this space so that we can get more competition in, and quite frankly, more capital in, to take the cost down around launch and building a manufacturing base for these mega constellations. But we are pretty reliant at this point on the DoD for the high side, and for the commercial side, everything's going through SpaceX.
Yeah, so this is a thing I think about a lot as the venture capital guy, the sort of token non-capitalist, the government guy.
The socialist.
I remember
the token socialist. Sorry,
Is
we'll
that-
just say it very boldly.
A heavy accusation. What's old is new again. South Park's in the news. Garrett's making poop jokes. Simon's a socialist. Well, the rules don't matter anymore, everybody. But I think history is actually a great place to start here, because I think about SpaceX a lot in this conversation, obviously. But I think about how SpaceX got started, and it's because they were excluded from DoD launches, right? Like, this was one of the big fights that they had early on, was that national security space launch was dominated by a U.S. government-funded entity. And then when SpaceX tried to compete, the government did a really funny thing and gave a ton of money to that government-funded entity to build a rocket to compete with SpaceX. So SpaceX had to sit on its hands and wait while the government built a new rocket to compete. And then it lost anyway. It was a disaster. It couldn't keep up. And there's a lot of like funny nuances to that. That government-funded entity basically existed to lure away Russian engineers and prevent them from working on the Russian commercial industry. So even as we hated them, it served like an interesting geopolitical function of retaining talent. Oh yeah, that's why John McCain killed it, because it had a Russian-built rocket, and then nobody really talked about, well, if they're building rockets for us, that means they're not building rockets for other people.
So do I hear agreement? I didn't hear either of you say this explicitly, but Brian, it sounds like maybe you're feeling like, no, it's not optimal if there's only one company, a SpaceX,
and that's where I was driving towards. Is a lot of us, I think, that are upstarts and that are innovators in the space, we really want to win, but often when we win, we also want to monopolize. We are not altruists that, like, if we become dominant, we're going to allow competition to thrive without doing our absolute best to capture the biggest piece of the pie we can. That's the profit incentive, right? There's no incentive for SpaceX to take their foot off the gas and let other people catch up. No. So like the government is the only entity that can incentivize that competition, because they have the preponderance of launch opportunities.
And that might be the deregulation topic, Brian, that you were just talking about, as applied to the space and space launch capabilities. In other words, we can't expect, nor should we want, SpaceX to take their foot off the gas. But at the same time, you need to open up the space for additional competition, which drives better product development, more ambition, capability development, but also...
Don't you think deregulation would similarly benefit SpaceX? Like,
yes,
if deregulation is going to help a small guy, it's going to help SpaceX run even faster. They're just going to crush you.
Unless the deregulation maneuver is aimed at, basically boosting the chances of small upstarts, but I agree. I think deregulation, depending on the details there, could benefit.
It's rising tides, right? Like,
sure.
You're just in deeper water with a big fish.
Could be.
I mean, the reality, though, is the sat launch community within the DoD and that sec groupings is still, it's still the pylon of like what matters in our world. But the reality is the folks who need 1,000 more microsatellites that would even fund this for use cases in agriculture, in weather, in honestly the financial industry, from hedge funds, PE funds. Like, I think this is actually an infrastructure improvement issue. We don't have the infrastructure to build, 100 more launch sites. And China doesn't have that problem. They don't have a workforce issue. They can do that tomorrow. And if they really want to, which we've seen this, they'll just build a new island and create that. And so that's where, they've done that in Hainan. It's been written about. It was written about recently in War on the Rocks. Like, this is an issue that goes back to the administration's efforts to reindustrialize and build up the manufacturing base. I just think, like, one of the things that's been lost, because it's been heavily discussed from a ammunition or munitions perspective, and a general supply chain issue, is that, like, if we do not figure this out very, very quickly on the space side, comparing the capital advantage of SpaceX to all of China is not a fair fight.
Brian, you're just to call this out, this isn't necessarily a disclaimer, but Booz Allen Ventures has a number of portfolio companies that play in the space arena. Albedo is one of them, I believe. What else? What else are you guys in?
We're also in Quindar
Quindar. Yeah, that's right.
and Starfish,
That's right. Okay.
and all heavily dependent on SpaceX,
Yeah.
and successfully, by the way. So
Sure. I mean, a lot of folks have built some dependence on SpaceX, maybe through one of their product lines, Starlink, right? So, like, one of the fears about having a solo vendor in the commercial space for, quote, critical technologies or infrastructure is that at the whim of the chief executive or a senior executive in that company, you could turn on or turn off capability in time of crisis to change the tide of conflict in the way that we saw Elon and SpaceX do with Starlink in Ukraine, Russia in 2022, 23,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
listen, there are plenty of areas of the country this could be majorly incentivized with tax deductions, infrastructure, manufacturing tax cuts in large swaths of the country that don't sit on, let's say, a federal land site that is maybe, you don't want to build this in the middle of Red Rocks, right? I'm not saying that, but there's plenty of space in the middle that's not just Colorado that we could build up this kind of launch capability.
Yeah, what is it like?
Just,
something like 80% of the entire state of Nevada. These are very round numbers. Is actually federal land, right? Like so. Right.
I mean,
and so like
you could even look at some of like the old there's old decommissioned NASA sites all over the place. There was a space shuttle landing spot in Montana. I think it was up in Glasgow, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong there.
Yeah.
But that stuff's all over the place. There's tons of open land with space to do this stuff. The infrastructure is the hard part, right? Is it close enough to a town that can support a workforce and keep people there? That's like the part of the puzzle that I think people often forget about, like, thinking like the Manhattan Project, right? They're like, oh, you just go out to the middle of nowhere and knock it out. I'm like, they built a town, they locked everyone in the town. That was the secret sauce of the Manhattan Project, was that we shipped our best and brightest to the middle of nowhere and said you can't leave until this is done.
Yeah, and the alternative for people in that event, the Manhattan Project, the alternative was work in a university somewhere on the same problems that they were operationalizing with the Manhattan Project. Nowadays, you have commercial entities competing for that same talent with way more ability to compensate and tempt people away from that kind of, more like
Are there any
altruistic.
significant competitors to SpaceX right now in America? Anybody, do we know of anyone that's in that launch space?
ULA is the only
ULA, yeah, they're not a startup.
No,
right?
that's
They're
that's
big.
the
You're
incumbent.
correct. They are the competitor.
And Boeing, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say Boeing. Yeah, I was going to say Boeing, but then
ULA is a joint entity between a couple of primes.
I didn't.
That is the.
But this marries nicely into the fact that, like, there's probably all these federal sites with super valuable land locked up in 50-year leases that could be utilized for lots of other purposes, not just defense, but commercial as well. So,
yeah, totally agree.
An interesting thing, right, is with this Chinese attempted revitalization of their commercial space industry is really built around this like top-down regulatory reform coming from that government. Because if they're gonna try to build your own commercial industry, it's not just the Chinese government telling all these companies to spring into existence. They have to incentivize the creation of them. Which we talked a little bit about this before the pod. I'm sure that's something that Brian and Garrett, you can speak to. The White House just put out this big AI action plan. Do we need something like that for space? When was the last time we had something like that?
It's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. AI action plan is pretty ambitious, and it is all about deregulation and slimming down, the regimes that prevent new entrants into the AI space. But I mean, that's a complex topic, and it's ambitious. I'll give them that. I'll give them that. It's ambitious to free your AI from ideological bias, which I think is one of the big tenets of the AI action.
So, I was there during the launch. So I saw all the cabinet secretaries speak. It was hosted by the Hill and the Valley crew as well as the All In crew. All of this is online via the All In podcast. I thought it was exceptionally well done. Um, Vice President Vance, kind of, he's had these two famous speeches now.
The one in
where
Germany and this one?
Yep.
Yeah.
And this one was really well done. And then I think POTUS talked about this heavily too, which is if we care about unleashing AI, do we want to be on the side that it is built on an infrastructure stack that is predominantly American,
Yep.
If not, as much as possible, all American? It is where all of the bleeding edge AI predominantly is happening, with some exception to, large language models, of which has been covered ad nauseum across multiple different podcasts. So I'm just going to go into it, nor could I at a degree at which your audience may care about. But I will say that the number one thing that I took away from that day was fast tracking investment into compute, energy, infrastructure, and this all takes massive quantity of energy. And I think what was pretty telling was, listen, coal is one of our coal and natural gas are two of our best resources, and we need to unlock as much of that as possible. And that's going to power the data centers of the future. I think an interesting geopolitical question is like what was announced in the Middle East is, do we want those data centers in the Middle East? Do we want them here? Oracle, OpenAI, and SoftBank announced a $500 billion investment into building the data centers of the future that are going to power AI. I mean, I think we would all agree that has to take shape here, but the cost of doing that is super intense, and it is only going to happen if we unlock a lot of the natural energy resources that we currently have, which is the two that I talked about in nuclear.
I do think that those guys, that whole group around the executive planning and execution for this type of an initiative, have a lot of this right. But again, I'm no expert, so I can't make a final judgment here. But energy seems like it's crazy important here, and that our adversaries or our pacing and kind of opponents, or however the competition, China, is outpacing us just like drastically on the energy electrification front, which seems to be a major kind of bottleneck or hurdle that we're going to have to clear. But secondly, if you continue to prevent the export of the chipsets that are important for this whole category of technology to be built, if you do that and you effectively, block China from acquiring, the latest and greatest, or even the last generation of stuff from chip makers like NVIDIA, then you are inspiring them to create their own industry domestically and to create their own stacks. And Brian, this is what you're talking about, right? Like, wouldn't you prefer to allow them to use our stuff so that the world then runs on an American tech stack? And so I found it compelling. I heard this argument probably on the All In Pod and maybe in a few different places as this AI action plan unrolled, and there was peripheral commentary on it. But one of the ideas was, well, let's sell them, the last generation of chips. Let's allow that export. That way, you prevent the domestic Chinese industry to build their own, because this is better than what they could build on their own and faster. But it's still not as good as the latest and greatest on our side. So we're still going to be like ahead, in quotes, right? So that seemed like, a fairly reasonable strategy around, the trade element and the export control element of this problem set. I don't know if that resonated for you, Brian, or not, but that rung true for me.
I totally get it, right? I totally get the fact that if you were to look at Intel, AMD, I mean, obviously everybody is just obsessed with NVIDIA for all the right reasons. Jensen was there that day and spoke pretty publicly, as well as the AMD CEO. I I think we would want to figure out some export controls where we make some limited ability of our best U.S. companies building chips here to be released into China. That still doesn't solve the TSMC problem,
Sure.
unfortunately. And then,
But
like, if you
but
go
Brian,
down a layer, one of the things that Vice President Vance was talking about is like, do we even have the workforce to build that inside the United States for those companies?
let's say that you do want to do that. You do want to solve the TSMC problem, and you do want to like reshore, or onshore, or friendshore, or whatever, diversify
Yeah.
that somehow, right? You still need to like create time and space in order to do that. Let's say that that's a 10-year project. I have no idea. Probably it's a 5 to 10-year project if you include workforce and kind of the long, slow buildup of investment into infrastructure and physical sites and all that stuff. It's probably a 5 to 10-year game. So you got to open up space, during which time you don't want the competition to spiral out of control into open conflict or worse. And you don't want to allow the competition, in this case China, to get significantly ahead of their own tech stack and kind of evolve away from an American-based tech stack. So I think something has to be done here, right? Like you've got to concede, you've got to compromise somewhere in the middle. And that's why I think this kind of middle ground of allowing the export of decimated last gen chipsets and not the current gen chipsets, to keep them in our game, right? To keep them in our game long enough so that we can deter conflict, open conflict, and onshore, reshore, friendshore in a way that's beneficial for us long term. That's what I think is going on. And like only time will tell if this strategy actually matures and plays out in a positive way. We're unfortunately a bit strapped on time for the rest of the conversation, but Brian, a couple of big things happened in venture land. We'll cover two of them right now, but for this first one, I'm putting my hat on. Simon, you don't have one of these hats.
No one told me to wear a hat.
Dude, if you've got a hat, that would be awesome.
It's just not in the room.
You're not repping.
So for anybody who's been
I have
paying
like 6
attention,
hats.
for anybody who's been paying attention, yesterday,
Living under a rock.
yeah, or that, yeah. Axios ran an exclusive piece covering a Reveal Series B announcement, which went live yesterday. It's been in the works for quite some time. Thank you for the applause. We're very excited about it. We don't dwell a lot on kind of Reveal internal stuff, even though this is a Reveal podcast, but we've been working on that for a while. It's a classic Series B, $30 million, led by Ballistic Ventures and a friend, mentor, advisor, and early personal accounts seed angel investor in the company, Kevin Mandia, who's a legendary cybersecurity founder, CEO, private, publicly traded, and is one of the founders or co-founders of Ballistic Ventures. An incredible guy. He's joining our board. That's going to bring Reveal a bit more into the edge cyber and electronic warfare space. It's going to bring Ballistic a little bit into the defense space. So this was a kind of a marriage of incredible mutual enthusiasm, and we're just grateful. But Brian, you guys, Booz Allen participated, Shield Capital participated, Defy Partners and our friend of the company and personal friend Neil Sikera participated, Madison Valley Partners participated. We had a whole bunch of participation, and it was incredible. Most of our insiders came along with us, and it's just exciting. We're on one of those growth trajectories that I think many young companies can only dream about. And 7 years ago, if you'd asked me if this was going to be happening for Reveal, I'm not sure what I would have said, but this is playing out really, really well, and I'm super excited. So, what do you think, Brian? You're an observer on a board. Give me the straight feedback. What do you think?
Yeah, listen, I've got 17 companies currently under the Booz Allen umbrella, and not to get like emotional or sappy, this game is really fucking hard. There is no shortage of barriers to entry, and we can talk about right founders. We can talk about clear tech that is needed inside of both the DoD and public sector. But I think it's the maturation of both those with the right capital partners. But like, hey, you and I have debated both publicly and non-publicly how hard it is to create value for portcos. And it is extremely difficult from the capital end of the spectrum. Um, I just think it is a testament to you and your founders. And I know you don't want to kind of yank your own chain here, but I think it's a testament to you and your own founders for pulling in some of the best product people in the world, as well as folks who have served on the mission side and honestly just grinded it out, right? I mean, this hasn't come in, multiple $100 million wins. I appreciate how you guys have methodically built the business and only took capital when it was needed for expansion. And that has been a long journey, right? Like it is, if anything, it is, I think a model for how a lot of these companies who are taking a tremendous amount of capital, these huge rounds that are coming out with little to no revenue. I mean, pre-revenue companies taking $100 million rounds down. I hope they're successful. I want all these companies to be successful, but it is very, very difficult.
It's a real velvet glove. I hope you're successful. I hope you do well.
Yeah. I hope they're not. There's some competitors out there. I hope they don't do well. But Brian, maybe. you guys got in with us a bit over 4 years ago in 2021. We had a sliver of allocation left in a financing project that we did, and as I recall, you were begging me for more allocation, begging me for more allocation, as I recall.
Exactly.
Memories fuzzy, but we're grateful for your partnership and for the not just the capital partnership, but the actual go-to-market and product partnership, which I don't think is the case for most investors. Most financial investors cut you a check and then they just want the update and the distribution at the tail end, and add very little material value over the course of the life cycle of the company. You guys are different. I think you are really trying to be good go-to-market and product partners in a way that most other companies or most other funds and most other companies just can't do, won't do, or whatever. So huge credit to you guys. We love that. But that isn't the only big news from the week. I mean, Reveal is killing it, of course. But I saw a little announcement that somehow you convinced the powers that be over at Booz to juice up your originally $100 million fund, as I recall, by $200 million. I mean, this is massive. I know your team. That's a lot of capital to deploy, even for the really great, high-performing team you've got. So, yeah, give us the breakdown. What's happening?
It's funny. The news. I mean, we had a good week last week. We had, within the last 10 days, we had you guys. We had Firestorm, and then we had our own, which I know you'll talk about because Dan is a good friend and also a China hawk. You should get him on this thing. He's even though he's a hippie from Southern California, as you like to quote, he's
totally.
He's in the.
I've never seen him not wearing flip flops, and I've been in some I've been in some professional forums with him. Never seen him not in baseball hat and flip flops. It's amazing.
Yeah, listen,
some real value in living your truth.
Yeah, this is something that we felt. Listen, we're a top decile fund right now. Granted, my CFO will like to remind me it's all on paper currently. We've had an incredible amount of, quality people help complement this fund, to include folks like Wes Blackwell, who was, on your board previously and has since gone to Europe. James Gadea, who first found you through an Army project. Listen, the time is
Travis, right. Come on, Travis out of Austin. We got to give Travis some shots.
Well, I mean, Travis is, let's be honest. Travis runs the fund.
You said it.
I know he's not Marine Corps like you prefer, but he's an Army guy, so hopefully he's okay.
He's an artillery guy. He's combat arms, at least. Thank God. Thank God.
Listen, the $200 million upsize, I think puts us, as pure defense tech, certainly in the top 10, if not
big time,
based off of my research, as the 6th largest fund in the space. So I think it is big news. I think it is also complementary of our own story, which is we understand how important it is to get this right, and are putting our balance sheet to work to make sure that the next 50 primes that get developed, both on the software and hardware side, are going to lead with commercial, and they are going to be the best product companies that we can, pull through commercial into not only our own channels, and this is, Garrett, where you and I kind of get into it, right? Like they
healthy
have
sparring.
to be able to win on their own, and that takes capital. Obviously, the $200 million upsizing is probably going to be about 20 to 25 companies, so our check size is going to go up. You can do the math. We're still
going to lead rounds.
We've been asked. I still think as a fairly new fund, we're still only 3 years in. Technically, you were before our fund got stood up. I still like to follow institutional capital for folks that have been doing this for a long time, folks who we trust, the Ballistic guys, NEA, Battery, A16, Paul Kwan and the crew at General Catalyst. We have tons of good reference points, and this is a team sport, right? Like, we got to make sure these companies are successful. So I think the check size goes up a little bit. The 4 predominant areas we're focused on is defense tech, kind of anything in the kill chain, soldier born, soldier worn, AI, anything AI. We're predominantly focused a little bit more on edge and gen right now for obvious reasons. We've got 3 space deals, a quantum deal, and then of course we've had some cyber success, as having 6,000 cyber engineers at the firm and being pretty heavy presence at the Fort. I think the 5th area, which we came out and publicly said was around kind of a nice bun into like what we were talking about earlier, is we want to be part of this reindustrialization campaign. We want to be part of this manufacturing agenda, both in the AI work plan and, you see this with projects like Golden Dome, that there's going to be a ton more manufactured here in the United States. We have to be able to do this. And that capital takes a lot of money just because of it being predominantly hardware based, and the cost of capital is just way more expensive in the build mode. So we're super excited. We got a great reaction from industry, I think, and we're still prioritizing double bottom line. So it's got to be strategic for us, and we would like it to be successful financially.
Brian, I'm dying to ask. So I and you both have heard me talk about this separately for years. I think there's a really interesting set of incentives for these sort of corporate venture firms that are already in the DoD space heavily, right? That strategic double bottom line. As your fund gets a lot larger, and I want to put it in context, Lockheed has a $400 million fund. They have 4 times your head count. 4 times. Like, I'm not saying that they're dollar for dollar that much larger than you, but they are a massive organization, and you are throwing some serious venture weight around. And I think that's a very interesting indicator of where the priorities are there at Booz. Does this like significant growth in the fund, does it inform any of the way you approach the kind of mentorship and wraparound services you're giving to these portfolio companies? Because you've heard me say this before. You guys have access and you have decades of experience in circles that you can help folks run faster just by like, hey, we've been down X, Y, and Z road. Let me help you avoid some landmines here. So I'm sure you're already doing that to some extent, but does that math on that side change at all with this much larger fund?
No, and honestly, here's what I would say. We could do a better job, and there's some big news that we're going to announce in September that I can't quite say yet, but we recognize that with this additional funding that we've got to create really a separate substantiation of Booz Allen that is predominantly focused on accelerating these companies and the additional companies that we invest in.
And I want to say nobody's cracked the code. So when you say, we could do a better job, I think all of them could. It's sort of an untread path, because these historical venture capital folks who have raised across all these different industries, it's not the same as selling to DoD. So these DoD focused, corporate firms have a very interesting position that I have not seen anywhere else in the venture realm as a layman, where I'm like, ooh, you have some interesting tools in your tool belt. if you can figure out how to connect those parts of the company in a way, it could be really powerful. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have cooking in September.
Yeah, we're going to announce a couple big things that I think will have a material impact for the companies that we invest in, because ultimately Garrett and the crew and all the CEOs, to include Dan from Firestorm, they didn't need our capital. They could get that capital from anywhere else, so they're not taking it from a financial for a financial reason. And it can't just be about access, right? The access to PEOs, of which we have, predominantly unfiltered access. Listen, it's in the news, right? You can see how the EOs are being written up to create, 1,000 new primes. But there is this institutional knowledge, this kind of last mile integration and the middle office support, which I know was another thing we wanted to talk about today, which was, range space, facility clearance, all of the kind of non-sexy stuff that, when we talk about being successful inside the government, is predominantly around kind of compliance. Like, we're going to have to help there. Do we know lethality better than Lockheed? Of course we don't. Do we know maritime better than HII? Probably not, right? But there are areas that we do have battle scars where we've deployed downrange, and we need to do a better job making sure that we bring that. But I do want to, ring the bell a little bit. I think we have been very successful in picking the right companies, and we are trying to mature to the point where we actually are helping knock down roadblocks as much as possible. But I feel very strongly that any tailwinds we create within our own prime contracts, like one of the ones that we just won was a $300 million TOC-L, which was covered in the news pretty publicly. Like, we've got to figure out a way to incentivize bringing that commercial in. And honestly, that's a government issue right now. We don't have enough momentum behind firm fixed price contracts to incentivize both the primes and the non-traditionals. This can't just be about pass-through licenses, because that just doesn't create a value-add economy for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little bit of the kind of the hurdle that we encountered with you guys trying to work between Reveal and Booz, right? Like, there was a mismatch of incentives, I'll call it. We wanted to move very quickly into mass, license scale, mass adoption of licensing, software licenses, and I think you guys had a bit of a bias toward RDT&E as an on-ramp to larger opportunities that we could potentially co-own. And so I think honestly, it's been actually pretty fun and productive for us to, work with you to figure out how to align those incentives over the last few years. And I think the future is bright as the upstart non-traditional community figures out how to work with, the Booz Allens of the world to marry up the incentives, because there's so much latent power and energy and opportunity there. So, Brian, it's been just a damn pleasure to have you on. You need to come back. Sorry for this one being a little bit short, but Simon and I are off to meet the new Montana Adjutant General, so the senior most National Guard officer in the state of Montana, and we're looking forward to that. So, for everyone out there listening, viewing, we're going to have yet another awesome rotation in for guest co-host next week with Garrett Asta. Brian, Garrett Asta from Houlihan Lokey. He's a fellow Boone Summiteer. If you don't know what that is, sorry, I'm not going to explain anymore. You can't talk about it.
Don't give it away.
Yeah, but Garrett's going to be a good time. He's Houlihan Lokey is an investment bank and advises companies on both sides of M&A and corporate development activities. He's a director over there. An amazing perspective on, the material liquidity end of this entire dance that many of us are involved with, and it'll be a good conversation. So stay tuned for that. Follow us, subscribe, leave comments, leave us reviews. Also, refer us to your friends and your colleagues. This conversation can only improve as we get more listeners involvement. But Brian, thanks again for joining us, and that's a wrap. Thanks everybody. Adios.